All right, Seattle hockey fans, the extended break for the Seattle Kraken is just about over. Now, does that mean that we will miraculously have cured all of our ills, all of our ails, all of our weaknesses? Probably not. So let's talk about what we need on the quote unquote second half of the Seattle hockey season.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. My name is Ayala, your host here of Locked On Kraken, also the founder of Black Rosie Media, and it is National Girls and Women in Sports Day. So, of course, I want to highlight Black Rosie Media. We've got the Local W, other places like Circling Seattle Sports, Converge Media overall, that do such a great job of highlighting women in sports, girls and women in sports. So stick taps to all of you. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers to FanDuel will get a $200 bonus bets package if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. We'll talk about that a little bit as the show goes on. But if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm back at headquarters. If you are listening anywhere on YouTube or otherwise, you can probably hear that, yeah, I got a little bit of a cold. I got a little bit of a cold. Let me adjust my seat here. I got a little bit of a cold. I was on the road out of headquarters for a month, January 6th to February 6th, yesterday. So, yeah, the voice is a little hoarse. I apologize for that, but we're going to keep chugging along. Now, the Seattle Kraken were not one of the teams to get back into action immediately after the All-Star break, which was in Toronto. If you missed some of that coverage, I was in Toronto with our good man, Oliver Bjorkstrand. Had a good time. He informs me all about Bjork Around Find Out, which is basically give the guy time and space. And it's over, rock. But we kind of already knew that. The Seattle Kraken, though, are going to hit a road trip. So we're going to see them in Philly. Then they're actually going to spend an extended time in Philadelphia because they're practicing there tomorrow, Thursday. They're practicing Friday. And then, of course, the game on Saturday. Then they head over to a stomping ground of mine, the Prudential Center in New Jersey. I'm mad. I'm just missing them, two ships in the night. But they will be taking on the New Jersey Devils on the 12th on Monday. And then they have a back-to-back as they will take on the New York Islanders on Tuesday, February 13th. So it's going to be a good schedule for the Seattle Kraken coming up. I'm glad that they're getting these teams and these games outside of or on the other side of a break, and that we didn't get into action right away. But we definitely have some work to do. And I want to take you over to some of what Kate Shefty and Jeff Baker discussed in a recent article of theirs and a few other things, because these are basically things that we've been talking about here on Locked On Kraken. I kid you not, for the last several months in the off season even. And there are just some things that as this season is playing out for the Seattle Kraken, is it bad? Maybe. Is it good? Sometimes maybe. But I think what's almost worst for me is that it's a little bit of an indifferent season right now. And coming off of such a high, a franchise first, making it to the playoffs, you kind of hate to see it. So what's going to happen? And I will say that I do think that at times Jeff Baker over at the Seattle Times has been a little bullish as far as really saying, if the Seattle Kraken don't get it together in this season, if they don't strike while the iron is hot, that this is going to impact season ticket sales. And he's been talking a lot and is a really great resource on what this could mean for even broadcast rights. And I'm not in Seattle, so some of this is different. It affects me differently. And so Fubo has been a great model for me, but it's not a great model, and or could be a better model for those who are a little bit more local. So I always find it interesting to get Jeff's takes. But in one of his articles, this one entitled "Analysis Grading the First Half," in quotes, of the Kraken season. So he talks about a lot of things, so many things. But just in the synopsis, he talks about not really replacing fourth line depth. I mean, I did the easy math for you. We have not replaced the goals that Daniel Sprong, Morgan Geekie, and Ryan Donato gave us last year. And we see what they're doing on their respective teams this year, or what their respective teams are doing this year in some cases. And, you just wonder what's going on there. As far as us being in striking distance of a wild card position, that's a lot to do with goaltending, which, if you listened to the show last year, I talked so much about Martin Jones because he was massive for us. Now, is he the best goaltender that ever hit the National Hockey League? Is he even the best goaltender for the Seattle Kraken? The second one, arguable for sure, given what Joey Daccord is doing this year. But what did we learn our lesson from Martin Jones? Did we learn our lesson? No, I would argue that Joey Daccord has more of a future in the Kraken franchise than Martin Jones ever was going to, and that we signed him out of necessity. It was important and it was effective. However, are we learning from that? And I don't really know. Now I'm going on a tangent, but goaltending is a huge issue, I think, for me. But here's what I really wanted to talk about when it comes to Jeff's article. And again, so many great little nuggets in here, a lot of things that we've talked about before. But he grades by position. The overall team grade, Jeff Baker gives a C. I think that's about fair. Right now, the Seattle Kraken are still holding fast to that 5 spot in the Pacific Division. We are 21, 19, and 10 in 50 games played overall. So well over that halfway mark. We've talked when we were a little closer to that halfway mark. 52 points on the season. So, Vancouver is leading the Pacific Division with 73 points. Vegas got a big win over Edmonton last night. I was on CBS Sports to talk about that, to end and snap the this winning streak at 16 for the Edmonton Oilers, who are with 59 points. Those are your top 3 teams in the Pacific Division. So overall team grade, a C. We had a 9-game winning streak. We had an 8-game losing streak. So I think a C is about fair. Now, he gives the forwards a D grade. Ouch. And he talks in not significant detail, but he talks about Matty Beniers, maybe him not performing the way we would have wanted him to after a Rookie of the Year winning campaign might have impacted his other line mates, Eberle in particular. I thought that was a really interesting nugget, and I am very curious. I'm totally open to switching up the lines. I feel like we've talked about that. And Beniers, he's just got to figure some things out. I've been trying to be patient with him. I do think that he got wrecked and probably dealing with it's officially upper body, but maybe dealing with some concussion-like symptoms. I'm just saying that based off of what I saw, not saying that is, that's not what the team is officially saying, but we also know that the NHL is not necessarily good at kind of being forthcoming with those things. I mean, but come on, we know that he has a history, unfortunately, of being out with concussion-like symptoms. So, a D grade for the forwards. I mean, do I think it's wrong? No. Do I think it's harsh? Maybe, but not necessarily because it's wrong. Um, so that's it's just really interesting to me. Again, we've got a score. And Jeff actually makes another point in his kind of round table, which is basically just directly across the table with Kate Shefty, talking about even if the Seattle Kraken scored 4 goals in all of their games, um, they would win more games than they would have lost. But that, I mean, the fact that you maybe need that many goals, what does that say about defense? Does that say more about defense? Does it say more about where the league is? So I think that there's some of this that is definitely on the forwards. And I disagree with his defensive ranking. Now he does give these, I'll give you what he provides as kind of support for his ranking, but the overall ranking for the defense is a B. Now I believe that if it's not in this article, I think it's in the other one where Jeff basically outlines that the defense has been booned by Joey Decord. But he says the Kraken are allowing the 10th fewest goals per game at 2.86, up from 15th fewest last season at 307, and it's gotten better with Decord as the number 1 goalie. There you go. Again, he's giving defense a B grade, but a lot of that defense, he says, has to do with Joey Decord. Then he says they've fallen to 16th in shots allowed when last season they yielded the 2nd fewest. This unit, while solid, remains a bit too reliant on Decord and are vulnerable off transition. Who does that sound like, fam? Who does that sound like, fam? I say this all the time. I am not wowed. I am not overly impressed by our defensive units. I think we are serviceable. That being said, if you give the forwards a D grade, if you include the fact that I do think our forwards sometimes lapse on their defensive assignments, I agree with that grade. That being said, the B grade for defense overall, I don't think we're a B type defense. I don't even know, maybe a B minus, Is that nitpicking? I don't know, but B seems a little strong because to me, a B is like, okay, like that's good, I guess. But I do think we need to clear up on defense. He also mentions Riker Evans, saying that there's still some growing pains there, mentions Justin Schultz and how he might be someone that we see move by the trade deadline that'll come up next month. And then he talks about Alexia and Larson, that they're not necessarily winning a lot of foot battles. So, a B, okay, I'll get down with a B. It's not the worst thing, but our overall defense is definitely not a B. Our defenders, maybe you give them a B, but our defense is not a B-worthy defense. And then, of course, that goes to goaltending. Overall grade of a B. Decord was fantastic the last 2 months, allowing 2 goals or fewer in 16 of 20 starts. He'd be a Vezina Trophy candidate if not for the 6 weeks of season prior when he and Grubauer weren't doing enough to win games. Interesting. They weren't terrible, but some nights Grubauer gave up tough ones early on or Decord a flurry late. Now that's interesting. The fact that a Vezina candidacy could in some ways depend on your goalie partner is very interesting to me. I'm not saying he's wrong. I just think it's an interesting thing. And one of those hockey things that especially on the men's side, that I don't agree with. But I think he's right. Joey Decord, we saw that there were some games and they stand out. They were very prominent because to me at the time that Jeff is talking about, we were more like, let's give Joey a chance versus he's our guy. Should he still make some of those saves? Should he still make better decisions? Probably yes. That being said, the Joey Decord, you don't vote on Vezina at All-Star break and that's it. You know, what can Joey do for us down the road? And this is going to be one of those things where what do the Seattle Kraken do with goaltending? Goaltending is just a mystery to me. I never really can wrap my mind around what the long-term plan is for goaltending because for the Seattle Kraken because it seems predicated on Philip Grubauer. And again, I'd take Philip Grubauer every day, twice on Sunday in the playoffs, given how he performed in the playoffs for us last year. But that's not always what we see. We've only made the playoffs once. We've only been to 2 rounds, 14 games out of however many games, almost 3 full regular seasons. And if we can get that version of Philip all the time, then let's do it. But are we talking about coaches not wanting to change the system? Is there a pride factor, whether that's coming from Philip or the coaching staff, and that they don't want to say that Joey's the guy? I don't know what it is, but we've got to figure out definitively who we're going to in net. And I don't know the answer to that right now, including that sometimes I think we do a little bit too much. We did the most. We did the most. I had an episode last year. Did we break Martin Jones? And I feel like we're dangerously close to having to ask that question again about Joey Daccord, which is why I'm excited to see how he in particular will come back from the break. I got to take a little sip of water. But I have to let you know about some of our partners coming up on this episode of Locked On Kraken. I'm going to get into the Joey Daccord thing a little bit more. And again, that kind of back and forth between Kate Shefty and Jeff Baker, which again illuminates things that we've been talking about here on the show for months. I think they make some interesting arguments, some that I agree with, some that I don't. And then we'll end the show talking about Ty Cartier. I know I've owed you this interview and this little mock-up for a while, so we're going to give it to you, especially since my voice very well might crack before the end of this episode. But hey, that's on brand. What's cracking? Erica's voice. So stay tuned for that and more on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Indeed. Now, we are driven by a search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match. And you can match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates and works for you 24/7. So ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. That's kind of like that AI. They're using AI technology to their advantage. So listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. That's where you head for that $75 credit, because if you need to hire, then you need Indeed. And happy hiring, folks. Check out our friends at Indeed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We bring you your team every day. You can find us on YouTube. We are past 1,000 subscribers. We're into monetization, which is amazing. You can also listen to Locked On Kraken and any of our Locked On podcast shows on the Sirius SXM app. And when it's a game day, you can find your favorite broadcast. That's right. Of course, you want to listen to our guy, friend of the show, Everett Fitzhugh, and his partner, Al, or maybe you want to listen to JT and John and the boys. Either way, you can find the broadcast of your choosing for any Seattle Kraken game. That's over at Sirius SXM. Also want to remind you that we have our 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. You can find episodes of Locked On NHL, which would include the Women's Hockey Spotlight, that are on there on a consistent rolling basis. That's right, Locked On Sports Today. And if you are watching on YouTube, we will direct you right over there just as soon as this episode ends. So make sure you go check that out. Okay. Oh boy, the Seattle Kraken, the grades. I don't agree with the defensive grade. That forward grade is tough, but I kind of like that it's tough because at the end of the day, I do think our forwards really have to step up. So as I mentioned, Jeff Baker and Kate Shefty kind of collaborated on 3 thoughts on how the Kraken did over their first 50 games. And so they have a few questions. One of the questions is, what is the biggest takeaway over the last 50? And they both respond, what's the biggest thing you took away from the last 2 weeks? So leading into All-Star break. And then what's the biggest impediment to the Kraken making the playoffs, which is very, very interesting. So let's start with the first question, which again is, what is the biggest thing you took out of the first 50 games? Now, this is where I thought the math was interesting. Jeff brings this up. His biggest takeaway is that the Seattle Kraken need to score 3 goals or more to win hockey games. And we've kind of talked about this on Locked On Kraken. You know that every day we have, or when we have a game day, I can't even get up there. My voice is super, super low right now, or at least the lowest that it's been for me in a really long time, probably my whole life. Anyway, so, we have our game day episodes, and I like to go over the scenarios. When do we get wins most regularly, consistently, statistically speaking? When does the opponent that we're taking on? And we not only need to get, this was a big thing in season 1 and parts of season 2. Not only do we need to score a lot of goals, but in this season especially, I've really been taken, and we talked about this maybe last week, I've been taken by the amount of times that the Seattle Kraken lose when they trail late in the game. So I like this. But unfortunately, Jeff says the Seattle Kraken, have scored 2 or fewer in nearly half of their games, 23 out of 50. And if that continues, they will indeed miss the playoffs. Jeff goes on to say, when they score 3 or more, they are 19, 2, and 6. That's right. In 27 such games, they've gotten points 25 times. In 20 starts, backstopped by Joy Decord, after Philip Grubauer's injury, the Kraken went 10-0-2 when scoring at least 3 times. Very interesting. So Kate's biggest takeaway is basically the same. They just need to score more. And she also kind of talks about the front office letting a lot of the scoring depth go in free agency. She says outputs across the board have dropped, and Seattle has been just outside the playoff picture at best this whole season to date. If it sounds like I'm eulogizing this group, I'm not. Just because it didn't work the same way doesn't mean it won't at all. So I think that's an interesting takeaway. And we've heard from the Seattle Kraken. That's why I was so excited at the Winter Classic, which this is the beanie I'm wearing to try and keep some warmth at the top of my head while I'm not feeling my best. But that's why I was so taken by what Dave said as far as the identity of his team. Coach Hack saying that we have to be more defensively minded. That's also what Oliver Bjorkstrand told me. Again, the audio got really choppy, and I apologize for some of the bad audio during All-Star weekend. But that's also what Oliver Bjorkstrand told me when I asked him about it. He said we've kind of had to have a different identity. And he said a part of the reason that we've had to lean into our defense is because we're not scoring as much. So I think that's very interesting. Okay, biggest things you took from the last 2 weeks. Let's start with Kate saying, I'm not as worried about doing just enough against teams that only need just enough, because Jeff, spoiler alert, talks about losing games to some teams or keeping it close against teams that statistically speaking we should beat, which I do also share that concern. But I appreciate what Kate is saying here. She calls it a conservation of resources. And because the Seattle Kraken are having so much difficulty staying healthy, I mean, Andre Burakovsky has made 3 returns already this season, you know, I can understand this. I don't like it, but I appreciate the sentiment. Now, there are some exceptions. And for Kate, the 2-0 loss to the Sharks was hard to watch, she writes. You could see it coming in about the first intermission when it was still scoreless. They offered up in postgame that San Jose was tough defensively, and Mackenzie Blackwood was the difference. The Kraken could have and should have handled that. Credit to your opponent, of course, but that was a bad loss, and the Kraken did it to themselves. Can we just... I feel like I was pretty fired up after that game because the Pollyanna effect was starting to take way. That was an inexcusable loss. So thank you, Kate, for saying the obvious. Again, if you want to hear a little bit of what Jeff or read of what Jeff is saying, then I highly recommend that you check out the article. I'll put it in the show notes. But I want to move on. Also, because my voice is going to give out soon. Biggest impediment to the Kraken making the playoffs. And it's quite simply put, I've wondered this question aloud early on and knew that this could be a challenge for this Kraken team just because it's season 3, baby. We gotta, as they say, we gotta start mucking it up. We got to start really showing what kind of a team that we want to be. And we haven't really done that since we made the playoffs last year. So Baker says they're running out of time. They're running out of time to get it together. We're past the halfway point. We're past 50 games. The Seattle Kraken will be past 50 games, I should say, by their next game will be game 51. So we're running out of time is what Jeff is saying. They can't let the 2-point gap in the wild card race grow to 5 or 6 by starting the East Coast swing the same way they just played their last 4 games. Do that, and the season could be effectively over. I remixed some of the words, but that's what Jeff's sentiment is. I don't disagree. There's no way the Seattle Kraken make the playoffs if they played like they did in their last 4 games. There's no way. Sitting 5th right now in the Pacific Division, which at the top is just, you want to talk about scoring galore. I've been talking to you for weeks now about the goal differential. And just looking at the goal differential alone, we are not in the same league as the Pacific Division teams that we're trying to jockey for position against. We're just not. And then you go to the wild card, you've got the LA Kings plus 20, the St. Louis Blues, they're a minus 12, and the Nashville Predators, who are a minus 7, just like us. So the only chance that we have is in the wild card, but we have to then play teams that are in better playoff positioning than us. And sometimes we have trouble with that. So this is something. So Kate Shefty also answers, it's funny. We were so positive about their playoff chances so recently. The scuttlebutt is all doom and gloom following the nature of this streaky team. When they're on, they can carve their way through a month of the schedule without a regulation loss. The things that brought them back down were key injuries and locker room illness. Now, that is fair. That is fair, Kate. And my opinion is, those things exacerbated the situation and the circumstances, which then, instead of making me think, oh, wow, look what this team is doing, even though they're not healthy, fitness wise, and they're not healthy, physically because of the illness that was going around. Instead of being like, oh, only what we could do only if we were healthy. My question was, well, why aren't we doing this when we're healthy? If that makes sense. It was a different frame because there were things that you have to do in quote unquote desperation. You have to keep it super simple. Why not keep doing that? If it's effective, keep it simple, silly, as they say, right? KISS it, KISS, the acronym. Why not just keep things simple? It sounds basic, but I don't know how else to put it. Confidence. And a healthy Vince Dunn and Adam Larson. During those 4 games, when Dunn was injured and Larson was sick, it was so suddenly apparent how so much of the Kraken offense runs through its top defensive pairing. I think that's also a really great observation. Adam Larson doesn't get credit for everything that he does for the Seattle Kraken. And he's, I said it before, he's a dark horse, I think, for a leadership role. And I think it's a small sample size, but I think it points to a bigger issue. It also, in my opinion, points to why I would not grade our defense a B. But, I digress. Kate closes out the article. The Kraken have potential. They showed it in December and in early January. As long as Decourt is still going, it doesn't have to be pretty, just composed. And that last word, composed, is honestly the concern for me. Because to me, composed implies a few things. You're in control. You have potential to go beyond your composition, but you have the discipline to stay within it, keeping it simple. I don't know that this team even has the same discipline, arguably, that the season 1 team had. And that wasn't a great team on a lot of different levels, but they knew who they were. And they did their darndest to play that out. It just wasn't good enough on a lot of nights. This team has potential, and that's what's frustrating to me, is that they don't play composed, is that they don't always play disciplined. And I've talked to you about this before. So I don't know. It's going to be a tough stretch for us, though. Philadelphia, New Jersey Devils, New York Islanders, and by the way, also Boston in our next 4-game road trip. Then we have a homestand of Detroit, Vancouver, Minnesota, Boston again, and a Pittsburgh team who, it's kind of like a box of chocolates. You never really know what you're going to get. Got to figure it out, boys. I like that word composed, Kate. I really do. Coming up next, let's hear from Ty Cartier, who I think is a player with potential, but maybe is a little untapped. Did he come up too soon? Is he being utilized in the right way? I mean, those are all valid questions, and some of those we might not have answers to this season, given how we haven't been healthy. But I want to end with Ty Cartier because we are going to talk about Shane Wright. Just spoiler alert. We're going to talk about Shane Wright this week. And if the season for the Seattle Kraken doesn't improve, is it Wright's time? I think that's a valid question. And we're going to have to explore it sooner rather than later. So that's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Mentioned it at the top of the show, but today's episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like most, the Super Bowl and Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, am I right? Grabbing your favorite football snacks and placing some super bets. And that last part, especially, FanDuel can help you out with. That's because not only on FanDuel, not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored overall, and so much more that you can find on FanDuel. New customers, if you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, fans, I told you my voice is giving way. I am back in headquarters, which I'm super excited about. I'm not as thrilled that I had to spend my first day home kind of recuperating from a cold that I got on the back end of my trip, but I had a great trip. Thank you for those who have engaged with some of my content from All Star. I still have some stuff from the PWHL that I want to get out. And you can find most of that over at Black Rosie Media. But we also do have a women's hockey spotlight coming up this week. So we'll have some of that as well. But I want to get you over to this interview with Ty Cartier. A lot of this came right around the Winter Classic, but he is a player that I think we should profile. And again, sets us up to have a conversation about what is the right usage for Shane Wright. I think we're getting to a time where it's going to be hard for the Kraken to justify not giving Shane more reps, but we also have to be careful with how many times, we bring him up and down. So anyway, let's hear from Ty Cartier. We'll talk about Ty and Shane Wright throughout the rest of the week.
I think kind of that's what today's for, to enjoy the day, and you get to go out there with your family and stuff, and then tomorrow when game day rolls around, you kind of lock in and treat it as any other game, because you're right, it's a hard opponent and it's 2 important points.
Do you feel any kind of a rivalry with them?
Well, honestly, I've never played them, so I can't comment on that, but I'll let you know after tomorrow.
So for you, it's like your first test against the defending Stanley Cup champions.
Yeah,
it's got a little extra buzz to it.
Yeah, it'll be cool.
Hey Ty, I wanted to ask you a little bit about just being able to see the complete Seattle Kraken system, both from the Firebirds' perspective and now from the NHL.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you feel are similar? What's different?
Yeah, I feel like obviously it's just a well-run organization, so it's just stuff goes smooth down there and it's smooth up here, and I feel like they try to run things the same, obviously, because guys get called up, guys get sent down, stuff like that. So yeah, it's pretty seamless when you come up and when you go down.
And it seems like, if you think of last year, you spent a lot of time obviously with the Firebirds, but I guess maybe around this time last year, December, January, things started to fall into place for you. What would you say was one of the things, or even a few of the people, that really helped you find your game last season?
Yeah, I think just the coaches, they had a lot of confidence in me, and that really helped with my game, and kind of getting used to the AHL, and then around this time it started to turn around for me, which was great.
And you've been able to be a mainstay in the Seattle Kraken lineup here now. Obviously, a lot of injuries have created a few different lineups that you've played with. But what can you say has been some of the things that you felt you've been able to really accomplish and work on when it comes to refining your game?
Yeah, I think just working on the little things as a winger, just like plays on the wall, getting good in the D zone, and try to do the little things well, not just scoring goals and doing stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the day.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Have
a good one.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ty Cartier, just talking about him and getting acclimated and how he could get acclimated to the Kraken system, because the Firebird system is similar, stuff like that. And, Ty Cartier has been asked to do a lot this year. And again, I think in some ways it gives us a blueprint, or maybe even what not to do, or what scenarios we don't want for not only Shane Wright, but Riker Evans as well, who's kind of bobbled up and down. And there have been times where I was like, get this guy up here already. And then other times where it's like, well, I don't know about that. And I think, honestly, with Riker, you're falling into some politics. Not necessarily politics, but kind of asset management a little bit with Riker. And yeah, I want to explore why I think things are a little bit different with Shane Wright. And honestly, sometimes it just falls down to position. But that might not be a good excuse anymore. So we'll talk about that coming up. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. If you're like me, maybe take some extra echinacea, or elderberry to fight off some of the cold and flu happening. But we have some games coming up over the weekend. It's a road trip, so our guys are going to need us to say loud and proud, hold fast, stay true, and let's go Kraken. I'll catch you up on some notes and quotes as the Seattle Kraken stay on the East Coast for their practices ahead of their game against the Flyers. Until next episode, Erica L. Ayala signing out. Peace.